The sound of tearing silk echoed through the hushed ballroom, sharper than a gunshot. All eyes snapped towards the source, Bianca Vance, her face a mask of cruel triumph, holding a shredded piece of emerald fabric. Before her stood a simple waitress, her uniform now hanging in tatters, exposing the delicate skin of her shoulder. "That's what you get for bumping into me, trash," Bianca hissed, her voice dripping with venom. The waitress didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She simply met Bianca's gaze with an unnervingly calm fire in her eyes. The crowd murmured, unaware they were witnessing the spark that would ignite an empire's war. They saw a waitress being humiliated, but they had no idea she was Anya Sterling, and that her husband, the most powerful and ruthless man in the city, was watching from the shadows. The Valerius Grand Hotel's ballroom was a galaxy of artificial stars. Crystals dripped from the ceiling in shimmering chandeliers, casting a fractured diamond-like glow upon the city's elite. It was the annual Starlight Foundation Charity Gala, an event where fortunes were pledged on champagne-fueled whims and reputations were made or shattered between the amuse-bouche and the dessert course. Men in bespoke Tom Ford tuxedos, their wrists heavy with Patek Philippe watches, navigated the throngs of women poured into couture gowns that cost more than a suburban home. It was a jungle of silk and ambition, and tonight Anya Petrova was merely part of the scenery. Her uniform was a crisp black tailor-made dress, simple but elegant, a stark contrast to the peacocking finery around her. A small, discreet earpiece was tucked behind her ear, her only link to the security detail she had insisted on leaving outside the main hall. To everyone here, she was just one of the dozens of catering staff hired for the evening, efficient, silent, and utterly invisible. And that was precisely how she wanted it. From her vantage point, near a towering floral arrangement of white orchids and hydrangeas, she had a clear view of the main dais. Her eyes, a unique shade of stormy grey, missed nothing. She tracked the subtle shifts in power, the whispered deals masked by polite smiles, the predatory glint in the eyes of corporate raiders circling their next target. This world was a game, one she knew how to play better than most, even from the sidelines. Her gaze eventually settled on a couple holding court near the center of the room. Damien Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Innovations, was a man who wore his ambition like a second skin. He had a classic, camera-ready charm, a sharp jawline, perfectly coiffed dark hair, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was the golden boy of the tech world, his company's recent IPO, making him the city's newest, most talked-about magnate. Clinging to his arm, practically dripping in Cartier diamonds, was Bianca Vance. Bianca was the daughter of media mogul Robert Vance, and she moved with the entitled grace of someone who had never been told no in her life. Her gown was a fiery red Marchesa creation that demanded attention, its fabric shimmering under the lights as she laughed a tinkling artificial sound. She was beautiful, undeniably so, but there was a hardness in her sapphire eyes, a perpetual sneer playing on her perfectly painted lips that marred the image. Anya had been observing them for the better part of an hour. Damien was her husband's younger cousin, the festering wound in the Sterling family's side. The two branches of the family had been locked in a cold war for decades, ever since Damien's father had tried to stage a hostile takeover of the main family business, Sterling Enterprises. He had failed spectacularly, banished from the core empire, and left with a modest tech startup as a consolation prize. Damien had inherited that startup and his father's burning resentment, clawing his way back into the spotlight with a relentless, single-minded focus. Another glass of the Haut-9 Dom Perignon. Bianca snapped her fingers, clicking impatiently in the air without even bothering to look at the waitress who approached her. Anya kept her expression neutral, her movements fluid and professional, as she picked up an empty flute from Bianca's table. Right away, Madame Anya said, her voice soft and even. Bianca finally turned her head, her eyes narrowing, as she took in Anya's face. It was a fleeting, dismissive glance, the kind one gives to furniture. Yet for a split second, something flickered in Bianca's expression, a primal female assessment. Anya was not conventionally beautiful in the way Bianca was. Her features were stronger, her cheekbones high and sharp, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, simple knot. But there was a poise to her, an innate confidence in her posture that no uniform could hide. She was a still lake in a room full of crashing waves, and it was unsettling. "You're new," Bianca stated, not as a question, but as an accusation. "I don't recognize you. I was hired by the hotel for the event," Madame Anya replied, calmly refusing to be baited. Damien, ever the politician, gave Anya a cursory, charming smile. "Bianca, darling, let's not trouble the staff. We should go say hello to Mr. Blackwood." He placed a hand on the small of Bianca's back, but she shrugged it off, her eyes still fixed on Anya. "See that you're quicker this time," Bianca said, turning her back with a dismissive flick of her wrist. The insult was clear. "You are beneath my notice, but your service is still unsatisfactory." Anya retreated towards the bar, her composure a perfect, impenetrable mask. She wasn't angry. Bianca Vance was a gnat, a minor annoyance. This job, this disguise, was a necessity. Her husband, Adrian Sterling, was a man who collected enemies as easily as other billionaires collected art. He was a phantom, a whisper in boardrooms, a man whose true face was known to very few. His power was absolute, but silent. To protect him, and to protect herself, Anya had cultivated a life of near anonymity. Their marriage, a quiet ceremony, performed by a justice of the peace 2 years ago, was their most closely guarded secret. Tonight, Adrian was supposed to be in Zurich, finalizing a deal that would cripple one of his biggest rivals. Anya had taken the catering job as a way to observe Damien. Adrian had heard whispers that his cousin was getting reckless, making promises to dangerous investors that he couldn't possibly keep. Anya's sharp eye for detail and her ability to blend in made her the perfect reconnaissance tool. She could gather information unfiltered by the sycophants and yes-men who surrounded people like Damien. She returned with the champagne, placing it on the table with a steady hand. Bianca ignored her completely, now engrossed in a conversation with a portly man in finance. Anya began to move away, her mission for the moment complete. She had seen the desperation behind Damien's confident facade, the way his eyes darted around the room, constantly searching, constantly calculating. He was in over his head. That was the information she needed. As she turned to navigate through a cluster of guests, her path was suddenly blocked. Bianca Vance stood before her, her expression petulant. "Excuse me, madam," Anya said, attempting to sidestep. "You think you can just walk away when I'm talking to you?" Bianca's voice was low, but it carried an edge of steel. In reality, Bianca hadn't been talking to her at all. Anya paused, confused. "My apologies. I thought you were finished." "I'm finished when I say I'm finished," Bianca sneered. "I was watching you. You've been staring at my fiancé all night." The accusation was so absurd that Anya almost broke character. She had been watching Damien, yes, but as a target, not an object of desire. To Bianca, however, every woman was a potential rival, every glance a challenge to her sovereignty. "I assure you, madam, I was only doing my job," Anya said, her voice remaining placid. "Your job is to be invisible, not to ogle the guests." Bianca took a deliberate step closer, invading Anya's personal space. The scent of her expensive perfume, Jean Patou's joy, was cloying and overwhelming. "I know your type. You see a man with money, and you think you can bat your eyelashes and work your way into his bed. Let me tell you something. Damien is mine. A little gutter rat like you wouldn't even be a momentary distraction. The entire exchange was happening in a bubble of perceived privacy, shielded by the noise of the gala. But people were starting to notice. The conversation around them lulled slightly. Damien, seeing the brewing confrontation, began to move toward them, a look of weary annoyance on his face. He knew Bianca's temper. "Bianca, come on," he said, trying to take her arm. "You're making a scene." She started it. Bianca snapped, yanking her arm away. Her eyes, wild and furious, darted back to Anya. She needed a target for her misplaced insecurity, and the silent, composed waitress was the perfect one. "You think you're better than me, don't you, with your quiet little judgments?" Before Anya could respond, before Damien could intervene, Bianca's hand shot out. It wasn't a slap. It was something more deliberate, more humiliating. Her manicured fingers adorned with a massive sapphire ring hooked into the neckline of Anya's simple emerald dress, the dress she'd worn under her uniform for a quick change later. The fabric was delicate silk, a private indulgence. With a vicious tug, Bianca ripped it downwards. The sound was shockingly loud in the relative quiet that had fallen around them, a sharp, grating rip that sliced through the murmurs of the gala. For a frozen moment, no one moved. The torn emerald silk gaped open, exposing Anya's collarbone and the top of her shoulder in a jagged line. The uniform jacket she'd been wearing was now pulled askew, the damage beneath it stark and violent. It was an act of such calculated cruelty, designed for maximum humiliation. It wasn't just an attack on a waitress. It was a branding, a public declaration of status. I can destroy you, and you are powerless to stop me. Bianca Vance stood back, her chest heaving slightly, a triumphant, ugly smirk on her face. She held up the torn scrap of fabric like a trophy. There, she said, her voice ringing with satisfaction. "Now your dress looks as cheap as you are." A collective gasp went through the nearest onlookers. This was beyond the pale, even for the cutthroat world of the city's elite. Damien's face went from annoyed to horrified. This wasn't just a scene. It was a potential PR catastrophe. He grabbed Bianca's arm this time with force. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he hissed, his voice a low, furious whisper. But Anya didn't look at him. She didn't look at the shocked faces in the crowd or the pitying glances from the other staff members who were frozen in place, terrified of being drawn into the fray. She didn't even look at the ruined fabric of her dress. Her stormy grey eyes were locked on Bianca. There was no fear in them, no tears, no shame, no anger. There was only a profound, chilling calm. It was the calm of a dormant volcano, a placid surface hiding an immense, molten core of power. She didn't flinch. She didn't scramble to cover herself. She simply stood there, her posture perfect, her gaze unwavering, and let Bianca's pathetic victory hang in the air and rot. This unnerving composure seemed to infuriate Bianca more than any outburst would have. She had expected hysterics, a satisfying crumble. The waitress's stoicism was an act of defiance. "What's the matter?" Bianca taunted, her voice rising. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you too stupid to even realize what just happened? Go on, run to your manager. Cry. See what happens. I'll have you fired before you can even file a complaint. I'll make sure you never work in this city again, not even as a dishwasher." Anya finally moved. With slow, deliberate grace, she reached up and gently took the shredded piece of silk from Bianca's fingers. Bianca was so surprised by the move that she let it go. Anya looked down at the fabric in her hand, her expression unreadable. The dress had been a gift from Adrian, custom-made by a small, independent designer in Milan she admired. It was one of her favorites. A quiet pang of sadness went through her, but she walled it off. It was just a thing. Things could be replaced. Dignity once lost was much harder to recover. She folded the small piece of silk, neatly, her movements precise and unhurried. Then she tucked it into the pocket of her apron. Finally, she looked back at Bianca, and for the first time, she spoke in a voice that was no longer soft and subservient. It was clear, measured, and resonated with an authority that was utterly out of place for a waitress. "You are making a very serious mistake," Anya said. The shift in her tone was so abrupt, so complete, that it startled everyone who heard it. The deference was gone, replaced by something cold and hard. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of a physicist explaining the law of gravity. Damien felt a sudden, inexplicable chill run down his spine. He looked at the waitress, really looked at her for the first time. The uniform, the serving tray, the quiet demeanor. It was all a costume. Beneath it there was something else, something formidable. He didn't know what it was, but his instincts, honed in treacherous boardrooms, were screaming at him that Bianca had just kicked a hornet's nest the size of a skyscraper. A mistake. Bianca laughed, a shrill, brittle sound. "Threatening me? Oh, this is rich. Do you have any idea who I am? I know exactly who you are." "Bianca Vance," Anya replied, her voice still level. "You are the daughter of Robert Vance. You have a trust fund valued at approximately $90 million, a media degree from a university your father endowed, and a reputation for being volatile and cruel. Your greatest accomplishment to date is being photographed at events like this one." The detailed clinical recitation stunned Bianca into silence. The crowd murmured their interest, now fully piqued. This was no longer just a socialite bullying a server. This was something else entirely. How do you know that?" Bianca stammered, her bravado faltering. Anya gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "That's not the important question," she said. "The important question is, do you have any idea who I am?" Before Bianca could formulate a suitably scathing reply, a new voice cut through the tension. It was deep quiet and carried an unmistakable weight of command that silenced the entire ballroom instantly. "I believe that's an excellent question." The crowd parted like the Red Sea. A man was approaching, walking with an unhurried, predatory grace. He wasn't as overtly handsome as Damien. His features were sharper, more severe. He was taller, dressed in a flawless, custom-tailored dark charcoal suit, no tie, the top button of his stark white shirt undone. He wore no ostentatious jewelry, only a simple, elegant watch with a black leather strap. But power radiated from him, like heat from a furnace. He was the center of gravity in any room he entered, and right now the entire ballroom was caught in his orbit. Anya's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something relief, annoyance, love passed through her eyes. Damien Sterling's face went bone white. His blood ran cold. Of all the people who could have witnessed this debacle, it had to be him. Adrian Damien choked out his voice, barely a whisper. The man, Adrian Sterling, didn't even glance at his cousin. His eyes, the color of cold steel, were fixed on Bianca Vance. And then they moved to Anya, taking in the torn dress, her exposed shoulder, and her unshakable composure. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Adrian Sterling, the reclusive, almost mythical head of the vast Sterling enterprises, the man they called the Shadow King of Wall Street, had just entered the game, and he looked absolutely furious. Adrian Sterling's presence changed the very atmosphere of the room. The background chatter ceased completely. The string quartet faltered into silence, and the air crackled with a new, dangerous energy. He was a man who rarely made public appearances, preferring to pull the strings of his global empire from the seclusion of his penthouse office. To see him here at an event he would typically disdain as frivolous was a shock. To see him striding into the center of a tawdry confrontation was utterly unthinkable. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze a physical force. It swept over Bianca, and she visibly withered under its intensity. The sneering, confident socialite was gone, replaced by a frightened girl who suddenly understood she had wandered into a lion's den. His eyes then shifted to Damien, and the look he gave his cousin was one of pure, undiluted contempt. It was a look that said, "You are an embarrassment to my name." Damien swallowed hard, his face pale and slick with a sudden sweat. "Adrian," he repeated, trying to inject some confidence into his voice and failing miserably. We didn't expect to see you here." Clearly Adrian replied, his voice a low baritone that was both smooth and menacing. He still hadn't looked at Anya directly, but his entire posture was protective, his body angled slightly, as if to shield her from the others. "I was under the impression this was a charity event, a place for philanthropy, not for public displays of barbarism." Every word was precise, clipped and lethal. He turned his steely gaze back to Bianca, who looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "You," he said the single word, cracking like a whip. "You tore her dress." It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. Bianca opened her mouth, then closed it again. Words failed her. The power dynamic had shifted so completely, so seismically, that her entire worldview had been shattered in the span of 30 seconds. This man wasn't someone she could intimidate, not someone her father's name could influence. This was a different level of power altogether, a primal, absolute authority she had never encountered before. It was an accident she finally managed to stammer the lie, flimsy and pathetic even to her own ears. Adrian's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. It was a chilling, predatory expression. "An accident," he repeated softly. "You accidentally hooked your fingers into her neckline and accidentally ripped it open. An impressive lack of motor control. Perhaps you should see a doctor." A few nervous titters rippled through the onlookers. The humiliation was exquisite, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Damien, seeing Bianca flounder, felt a desperate need to regain control. This was his event, his moment in the spotlight, and his cousin was hijacking it, turning it into a public execution. "Look, Adrian," he started, stepping forward. "This is just a misunderstanding. The waitress was being rude and Bianca, she overreacted. It's been handled. There's no need for you to get involved." Adrian finally turned his head to look at Damien properly. The sheer force of his focus made Damien take an involuntary step back. "Involved, Adrian," said his voice, dangerously soft. "You seem to be under the misapprehension that this is your affair to handle. You are also under the misapprehension that you are in any position to tell me what I should or should not do." He took a step closer to his cousin. "Let me correct both of those errors. Everything that happens to this woman," he gestured almost imperceptibly towards Anya, "involves me. And you, little cousin, will never be in a position to tell me anything." The possessive, definitive statement hung in the air, sparking a wildfire of speculation. Who was this waitress? Why would Adrian Sterling, a man who commanded armies of lawyers and executives, personally intervene for a member of the catering staff? The whispers started quiet and frantic. Was she a former employee, a distant relative, a secret informant? No one could fathom the truth. Anya, meanwhile, remained silent. She watched Adrian, a complicated mix of emotions swirling within her. She was frustrated that he had blown his cover. Their anonymity was their shield. But she was also undeniably moved by his immediate, unequivocal defense of her. He hadn't asked what happened. He hadn't waited for an explanation. He had seen her in distress and had come to her consequences. Be damned. She finally met his eyes, and in that silent, fleeting glance, a whole conversation passed between them. "Are you all right?" his eyes asked. "I'm fine," hers answered. "But you shouldn't be here." Too late, his gaze seemed to say, with a hint of grim satisfaction. Adrian turned his attention back to the mess at hand. His eyes fell on the torn dress again, and a muscle in his jaw clenched. He shrugged off his suit jacket, the movement fluid and elegant. The jacket was a masterpiece of tailoring worth more than most people's cars. He walked over to Anya, and with a gentleness that stunned the onlookers, draped it over her shoulders. It was far too large for her, but the gesture was so tender, so intimate, that it sent a fresh wave of shock through the ballroom. He was covering her, protecting her, claiming her in a way that was more powerful than any words. The jacket smelled of him, a clean, subtle scent of bergamot and cedarwood. It was a familiar comfort, an anchor in the storm. Anya pulled it tighter around herself, the expensive wool warm against her skin. "Mr. Blackwood." Adrian's voice boomed, summoning the flustered event organizer who had been hovering helplessly on the sidelines. A portly, balding man scurried forward, his face beaded with sweat. "Mr. Sterling, an honor." "Is there a problem?" "There is," Adrian said coolly. "My associate," he chose the word carefully, "has been assaulted by one of your guests. Her clothing has been destroyed. I trust the Valerius Grand Hotel has a protocol for such things. I also trust you have excellent security cameras." Blackwood's eyes widened in terror. A lawsuit from Adrian Sterling would not just bankrupt the hotel, it would erase it from the map. "Yes, of course, Mr. Sterling. Absolutely. We will handle everything. The police should be called immediately." "No police," Adrian commanded, his voice dropping again. "This will not be a media circus. This will be handled privately. But it will be handled. As for your guests," his eyes sliced back to Damien and Bianca, "I believe they were just leaving." Damien's jaw dropped. "Leaving? We're not leaving. I'm a platinum sponsor of this event." Where Adrian corrected him, a chilling finality in his tone. "Your sponsorship is no longer required, nor is your presence. Get out." It was the ultimate power play. In his own world, Damien Sterling was a king. He graced magazine covers and rang the opening bell at the stock exchange. But in Adrian's world, he was nothing, a gnat to be swatted away. Humiliation burned in Damien's cheeks. He was being thrown out of his own party, in front of his investors and peers, by the man he hated most in the world. And all because his girlfriend had decided to bully a waitress. A waitress who, for some terrifying and unknown reason, was under the personal protection of the Shadow King. Bianca, finally seeming to grasp the magnitude of her blunder, grabbed Damien's arm. "Damien, let's just go," she whispered, her voice trembling. But Damien was trapped. To leave was to admit defeat, to crawl away with his tail between his legs. To stay was to defy Adrian Sterling, a man who had financially ruined nations for lesser insults. As he stood there, paralyzed by indecision, Adrian delivered the final devastating blow. He turned to Anya, his expression softening, almost imperceptibly, as he looked at her. "Are you ready to go home, darling?" he asked. The word darling dropped into the silence like a perfectly cut diamond. It was intimate, affectionate, and utterly unambiguous. It shattered every theory the crowd had been entertaining. She wasn't an employee. She wasn't an associate. Anya met his gaze and allowed a small, genuine smile to touch her lips for the first time that night. "Yes, Adrian," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I am." Adrian offered her his arm. Anya slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, leaving the oversized suit jacket draped over her shoulders. Together they turned their backs on the stunned couple and the speechless crowd, and began to walk towards the exit, an undisputed king and his mysterious queen leaving a battlefield of their making. The revelation was about to come, and it would be more explosive than anyone could possibly imagine. As Adrian and Anya walked away, a tidal wave of whispers erupted in their wake. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture so outlandish, so impossible, that no one dared to voice it aloud. The powerful, reclusive Adrian Sterling, a man rumored to be married only to his work and a common waitress. It made no sense. Yet the evidence was irrefutable, the raw fury in his eyes, the gentle way he covered her with his jacket, the casual possessive endearment, darling. Damien Sterling stood frozen, his mind racing. He felt a cold dread creeping up his spine, a primal fear he hadn't felt since he was a child facing his father's wrath. He stared at the back of the waitress, now cloaked in his cousin's $1,000 jacket, walking with a poise that belonged in a royal court, not a hotel kitchen. Who is she? The question hammered in his skull. Bianca was the one who broke the spell. Her mind, unable to process the power shift, defaulted to its usual setting, arrogant denial. "Where do you think you're going?" She shrieked, her voice high and ragged. "You can't just walk away. That waitress works for the hotel. She needs to be fired." Security, her hysterical cries, only served to highlight her complete loss of control. A few guests exchanged looks of pity and disgust. She was a queen deposed, still shouting orders from a throne that had turned to dust beneath her. Adrian and Anya stopped just short of the grand ballroom doors. They didn't turn around. Adrian didn't even deign to look back. He simply paused, a silent final act of dominance, allowing the weight of Bianca's desperation to hang in the air and suffocate her. It was Anya who turned. She pivoted slowly, her movements fluid and deliberate. The oversized jacket slipped slightly, revealing the torn emerald silk one last time. Her face was serene, but her stormy grey eyes were alight with a cold, bright fire. She looked past the gawking crowd, past a shell-shocked Damien, and settled her gaze directly on Bianca. "He's right, Bianca," Anya said, her voice carrying across the silent room, amplified by the perfect acoustics. "You were asking the wrong question. You asked if I knew who you are." "I do. You asked if I had any idea who he is." She gestured with her head toward Adrian. "I do. But the question you failed to ask, the one you should have started with, is, who am I?" She let the question linger, a final test. Bianca just stared back, her mouth agape comprehension, still stubbornly refusing to dawn. Anya's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. "You see, you assaulted a member of the catering staff. You destroyed her property. But you didn't do it in a vacuum. You did it at the Starlight Foundation Gala, an event which, for the last 5 years, has been the single largest beneficiary of the Sterling Family Philanthropic Trust." A new wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. The Sterling Trust was legendary, its endowments vast, and its influence immeasurable. And that trust, Anya continued, her voice gaining strength with every word, is managed by its chairwoman, a woman who prefers to remain anonymous, a woman who occasionally likes to work at these events to see firsthand where the money goes, and to ensure the organizations we support are running smoothly. Damien's heart stopped. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly shade of white. He felt the floor drop out from under him. No, it couldn't be. It was impossible. He knew the chairwoman of the trust was a closely guarded secret, known only as A.P. Sterling. He'd always assumed it was some elderly aunt, a holdover from a previous generation. Anya took a half-step forward, her presence suddenly immense. "You ripped my dress, Bianca. You called me trash. You threatened my livelihood." She paused, letting each accusation land with the force of a physical blow. "You did all of this in front of my husband." With that final explosive word, she turned back and placed her hand on Adrian's arm. Husband. The word detonated in the ballroom. The shock was palpable, a physical jolt that ran through every single person present. All the whispers, all the speculation, crystallized into a single mind-bending truth. This wasn't a mistress or a secret employee. This was his wife. The invisible waitress was Anya Petrova Sterling, the lady of the Sterling Empire, the secret queen to the Shadow King. Bianca Vance made a small choking sound. Her perfectly made-up face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She hadn't just insulted a waitress. She had assaulted the wife of the most dangerous man in their world. She had committed social, professional, and financial suicide in one spectacular, hubristic act. Damien felt like he was going to be physically sick. The full scope of the catastrophe crashed down on him. This wasn't just a family embarrassment. Adrian hated him. Adrian had been looking for a reason, any reason, to crush him and his fledgling company. And Bianca, in her infinite, arrogant stupidity, had just handed him a declaration of war on a silver platter. She hadn't just ripped a dress. She had torn a hole in the hull of Sterling Innovations, and they were sinking fast. "Oh my God," someone whispered from the crowd. "That's Anya Sterling." The name spoken aloud for the first time seemed to take on a life of its own. Adrian finally turned his head, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He surveyed the wreckage of his cousin's reputation, his cold eyes missing nothing. He looked at the terrified faces of investors who had backed Damien, now realizing they had bet on the wrong horse. He looked at the gossips and social climbers already composing the story they would dine out on for the next year. Then his gaze fell on Damien. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The message was crystal clear. This is the beginning. I will ruin you for this. I will take everything from you, and I will enjoy every second of it. He turned back to Anya, his expression softening once more. "Let's go home, Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice laced with a deep, resonating pride. He guided her out of the ballroom, the crowd parting for them in a wave of awed, terrified silence. The grand doors swung shut behind them, leaving a tableau of devastation. Bianca Vance finally succumbed, her legs giving way, as she crumpled to the floor in a heap of red marchesa and ruined ambition sobbing hysterically. Damien Sterling didn't go to her. He stood rooted to the spot, his champagne glass slipping from his nerveless fingers and shattering on the marble floor. The sound barely registered over the roaring in his ears. It was the sound of his entire world, everything he had worked for, everything he had built, breaking into a million irreparable pieces. The Shadow King had come into the light, and his first act was to declare war. Damien knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that it was a war he could never win. The ride home was silent. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white as the custom bulletproof Bentley sedan glided through the streets. Anya leaned her head against Adrian's shoulder, the adrenaline from the confrontation slowly draining away, leaving a profound weariness in its place. The heavy wool of his jacket was a comforting weight. Inside the climate-controlled quiet of the car, the chaos of the ballroom felt a world away. Adrian had one arm wrapped around her, his hand gently stroking her hair. He hadn't said anything since they'd left the hotel, his silence more comforting than any platitude. He was simply there, a solid, unshakable presence. "I'm sorry," Anya finally said, her voice a murmur against his chest. "I know this is exactly the kind of exposure you've always avoided." Adrian tightened his grip slightly. "Don't apologize," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Don't you ever apologize for what she did to you, or for what I did in response. My only regret is that I wasn't there sooner." His hand clenched into a fist for a moment before he consciously relaxed it. "When I saw her hand on you, I saw red Anya. All I could think about was tearing him and his entire world down. "You shouldn't have come," she said, though her heart warmed at his words. I had it under control. He chuckled a rare, soft sound. "Oh, I have no doubt you did. I saw your face. You were about to dismantle her piece by piece without raising your voice. It's one of the things I love about you." But he tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his intense gaze. "You shouldn't have to. You are my wife. No one will ever lay a hand on you and get away with it. Not on my watch." The secret of their marriage had been a mutual decision, born of necessity. Adrian's life was a minefield. His business dealings were aggressive and ruthless, earning him powerful enemies across the globe. Anonymity was his armor, and by extension, Anya's. She was his one vulnerability, the single pressure point his enemies could exploit. By living a quiet, unassuming life, she was not just safe. She was his hidden strength. Anya herself was no stranger to a life in the shadows. She was the daughter of a brilliant but disgraced Russian economist who had defected to the States with nothing but the clothes on his back. She'd grown up valuing intellect and resilience over wealth and status. She'd put herself through school earning degrees in finance and art history, and had met Adrian not at a gala, but in a dusty university library, where they were both researching the same obscure 17th century financial bubble. He was drawn to her sharp mind and her utter lack of interest in his name or his fortune. She was drawn to the quiet, brilliant man beneath the intimidating reputation. Their bond was forged in whispered intellectual debates and shared ambitions far from the prying eyes of the world. "This will complicate things," Anya said, thinking of the Sterling Trust and her anonymous work there. "It will be harder to operate now. We'll adapt," Adrian said simply. "Perhaps it's for the best. I'm tired of hiding you, Anya. I'm tired of not being able to show the world the brilliant, incredible woman I married." The animosity with Damien's side of the family ran deep. It wasn't just business. It was blood. Adrian's grandfather had built Sterling Enterprises from the ground up. He had two sons, Adrian's father, Richard, who was a visionary like him, and Damien's father, Edward, who was reckless and greedy. When the patriarch died, he left the company to Richard, giving Edward a generous but non-controlling stake. Edward, consumed by jealousy, saw this as an unforgivable slight. He spent years trying to undermine his brother, culminating in a disastrous, hostile takeover attempt funded by shady offshore lenders. The attempt failed, but it nearly destroyed the company. In the fallout, Richard, a man with a heart condition, suffered a fatal stroke. Adrian, then only 22, was forced to step in. He not only saved Sterling Enterprises, but built it into a global behemoth far beyond what his father or grandfather had ever imagined. He did it with a cold, surgical precision, cutting his Uncle Edward out of the family, and the business entirely leaving him, with only the small tech company that would one day become Sterling Innovations. Adrian never forgave his uncle for his father's death, and he saw that same reckless, entitled greed in Damien. He'd allowed his cousin to operate to build his own little empire as long as he stayed out of his way. But tonight, Damien hadn't just crossed a line. He had allowed his fiancée to attack the one person Adrian held sacred. For that, there would be no forgiveness. The car pulled into the private underground garage of their penthouse. As they stepped out, Adrian's head of security, a stoic man named Carter, approached them. Sir Madam Carter said with a respectful nod. "The initial fallout report is coming in. The story is already breaking on social media. The Waitress was a Sterling. It's the #1 trending topic globally." Adrian nodded, as expected. "What's the status of Vance Media?" Their stock is already down 7% in after-hours trading on the Asian markets, Carter reported. Your statement disavowing any future dealings with them has had the desired effect. Robert Vance has been trying to reach you. He's called 12 times in the last hour. Let him sweat, Adrian said coldly. And Sterling Innovations' Panic Carter said with a grim smile. Their primary investors, the Jensen Group, and a consortium led by Kenji Tanaka, have both scheduled emergency calls with Damian Sterling for the morning. Our sources say they are looking for an exit clause. They know that a war with Sterling Enterprises is unwinnable. Anya listened, a familiar sense of awe and trepidation washing over her. When Adrian moved, he moved entire mountains. He wasn't just going after Damian. He was systematically dismantling the entire infrastructure that held his cousin's company aloft. They entered the private elevator that opened directly into their apartment. The penthouse was a testament to their shared tastes, vast, minimalist spaces, floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city, and a collection of priceless art that was both modern and classic. Anya slipped off Adrian's jacket and laid it carefully on a chair. The torn emerald dress felt like a relic from another life. I'm going to change, she said. When she returned, dressed in simple silk pajamas, Adrian was standing by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring down at the glittering city below. He looked like a king surveying his domain. He'll lose everything, Anya said, softly, coming to stand beside him. Yes, Adrian said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He will. He will lose his company, his investors, his reputation. That woman will leave him the second the money dries up. He will be exactly where his father was 30 years ago, with nothing. Is that what you want? She asked, searching his profile. He was silent for a long moment, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. What I want, he said, finally turning to face her, his eyes dark and intense, is for him to understand that there are consequences. He grew up believing the world would bend to his will. His father taught him that. They thought my father was weak. They thought they could take what wasn't theirs. They disrespected our family, our legacy. And tonight, he stood by and watched while his pet viper attacked my wife. He showed the same cowardice, the same weakness of character that his father did. He reached out and gently traced the line of her collarbone, his touch feather-light over the skin that had been exposed by the torn dress. This isn't about business anymore, Anya. This is about honor. He dishonored you, and for that, his entire world must burn. Anya saw the old pain in his eyes, the pain of a young man who had lost his father too soon, who had been forced to become a warrior to protect his family's legacy. Tonight hadn't created a war. It had simply fired the first shot in a war that had been brewing for a generation. She placed her hand over his. Then we'll see it through, she said, her voice firm. Together. Adrian's gaze softened. He leaned in and kissed her, a deep, possessive kiss filled with all the anger, fear, and love of the night. In that moment, they were not the Shadow King and his secret queen. They were just a husband and wife standing together against the world, ready for the storm they had unleashed. The dawn broke over the city, but for Damian Sterling and Bianca Vance, the world remained dark. The aftermath of the gala was not a slow burn, it was an inferno. By the time the sun was fully up, their names were toxic. The video, surreptitiously filmed by a dozen different guests on their phones, had gone viral. Every angle was covered. Bianca's sneering face, the shocking sound of ripping silk, Anya's unnerving calm, and the terrifying silent arrival of Adrian Sterling. The narrative was set in stone, a cruel, entitled socialite, and her weak-willed fiancé had publicly attacked a powerful, beloved philanthropist who was working incognito. Anya, the secret sterling, was an instant folk hero. Bianca was the villain in a real-life fairy tale, and the public was screaming for her head. Bianca's world imploded first. By 7 a.m., she had been dropped by her modeling agency. By 8 a.m., 3 major brands, for which she was a paid ambassador, had publicly terminated her contracts, issuing statements condemning bullying and harassment. Her father, Robert Vance, a man who prided himself on his media savvy, was in full-blown panic mode. Vance Media's stock had plummeted overnight. Advertisers were pulling out. His own board was calling for his resignation for failing to control his daughter, whose actions now threatened their entire corporation. He had called Bianca, screaming at her with a fury she had never experienced. "You foolish, idiotic girl," he had roared over the phone. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You didn't just pick a fight with a waitress. You declared war on Adrian Sterling on my behalf. He's going to ruin us." The relationship between Bianca and Damien shattered just as quickly. After a night of bitter, screaming recriminations at Damien's penthouse, where she blamed him for not stopping her, and he blamed her for her monumental stupidity, the end was swift. "You have to fix this. Damien." She had cried, her face blotchy and swollen from hours of weeping. "Call him, apologize. Do something, fix this." Damien laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "There is no fixing this. You don't fix a direct insult to Adrian Sterling. He doesn't accept apologies. He accepts total surrender and complete annihilation. My company, my life's work is over because you couldn't stand the thought of a pretty waitress breathing the same air as you. It was your fault. You were staring at her." Bianca shrieked, falling back on her initial pathetic excuse. That was the final straw. "Get out," Damien said, his voice dead. "Get your things and get out of my apartment. Now." "You can't throw me out," she screeched. "I'm Bianca Vance. You're a liability," he retorted, turning his back on her. "And I'm cutting my losses." For Damien, the situation was far more complex and far more terrifying. His 9 a.m. call with the Jensen Group was a bloodbath. They were invoking the reputational damage clause in their investment contract. They were pulling their funding effective immediately. The call with Kenji Tanaka's consortium was even worse. Tanaka, a man who valued honor and respect above all else, was personally insulted by Damien's association with the incident. "You have brought shame upon yourself, Sterling-san Tanaka," had said his voice, ice cold over the speakerphone. "We can no longer be in business together." By lunchtime, Sterling Innovations had lost over 60% of its market value. A mass exodus of talent began as key engineers and executives, smelling blood in the water, started sending out their resumes. The company was in a death spiral. Desperate, Damien did the one thing he never thought he would do. He drove to the Sterling Enterprises Tower, a monolithic black skyscraper that dominated the city's skyline, and begged for a meeting with his cousin. He was made to wait in the cavernous, intimidating lobby for 3 hours of public humiliation for a CEO who was used to being ushered immediately into any office he chose. Finally, he was summoned to the top floor. The office was larger than his entire apartment, a stark, minimalist space with a single massive oak desk and a breathtaking view of the city. Adrian was not behind the desk. He was standing by the window, looking out his back to the door. Adrian Damien began, his voice cracking slightly. "Thank you for seeing me." Adrian didn't turn around. "I'm not seeing you, Damien. I'm allowing you to speak to my back for 2 minutes." "Your time started when the door closed." The cold dismissal was like a slap in the face. Damien swallowed his pride. He was here to beg. "Adrian, I am so sorry. For everything. What Bianca did was unforgivable. I should have stopped her. I was weak. I take full responsibility." "No, you don't," Adrian said, still facing the window. "You take no responsibility. You're just here because your little house of cards is collapsing. You're not sorry for what happened to Anya. You're sorry for what is happening to you." "That's not true," Damien insisted, his desperation rising. "I will do anything to make it right. I'll issue a public apology. I'll donate to the foundation. Name a price. Adrian. Anything." At that, Adrian finally turned. His face was a mask of cold fury. "A price," he repeated, his voice dangerously low. "You think you can put a price on what you allowed to happen? You think you can buy forgiveness for the public humiliation of my wife?" He walked slowly towards Damien, his presence filling the room, sucking all the air out of it. "Let me tell you what's going to happen. The Jensen Group and Tanaka's consortium have already sold their shares in your company. Guess who bought them?" A cold dread seized Damien. Adrian smiled, that chilling, mirthless smile. "Through a series of shell corporations, of course. As of an hour ago, I am the majority shareholder in Sterling Innovations, and as the majority shareholder, my first order of business will be to call for a vote of no confidence in the current CEO. My second will be to liquidate the company's assets and shut it down permanently." Damien stared, his mind unable to process the words. Liquidate, shut it down. But why? The technology is worth billions. The patents alone. You could absorb it into Sterling Enterprises. Why destroy it because it's yours? Adrian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Because I don't want your company. I don't want your patents. I want to watch you lose everything. I want you to feel the same helplessness my father felt when your father tried to destroy him. I am not just taking your company, Damien. I am erasing it. By the end of the year, it will be as if Sterling Innovations never existed. The sheer breathtaking cruelty of it left Damien speechless. This wasn't a corporate takeover. This was an execution. You can't, Damien whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. I can. Adrian stated the words, an epitaph. And I will. You have 60 seconds left. I suggest you use them to say whatever last words you have. You and I will never be in the same room again. Damien looked into his cousin's implacable steel-grey eyes and saw no mercy. He saw only the finality of a judgment passed down from on high. There was nothing he could say, nothing he could offer. He had lost. His father had lost the war a generation ago, and now he had lost it again. He turned without another word and walked out of the office, a broken man. As the heavy doors closed behind him, he heard Adrian pick up his phone. Carter Adrian's voice said, calm and clear, "Proceed with the liquidation, and get my wife on the line. I want to take her to lunch." 3 months later, the dust had settled. Damien Sterling was a ghost, his company liquidated, and his name erased from the world of finance. Bianca Vance, a social pariah, had been exiled by her own family to save their crumbling reputation. In their place, Anya Sterling had risen. No longer a secret, she embraced her role as the formidable chairwoman of the Sterling Trust, captivating the public, not with her story, but with her substance. At a press conference, she launched her masterwork, the Phoenix Initiative, a fund to empower women who, like her, had been underestimated. Adrian watched from the front row, his pride evident. The scandal had not broken them. It had solidified their partnership. That evening he revealed his final move. He had quietly acquired the disgraced Vance Media. His plan wasn't to destroy it, but to gift it to Anya. Imagine the voices you can amplify, he told her. The company that tried to silence you will now become your megaphone. Anya looked out at the city, no longer a shadow, but a queen with a newly acquired kingdom, ready to reshape the world. And so, a ripped dress became the catalyst for the fall of one empire and the glorious rise of another. Anya's story teaches us that true power isn't about the clothes you wear or the name you carry, but the strength and grace you hold within. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one with the most to say. What did you think of Adrian's ultimate revenge? Was it justice, or was it too ruthless? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives on these intricate tales of drama and redemption. If you were captivated by Anya's journey from the shadows into the spotlight, please don't forget to hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a dose of empowerment and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable dramas. Your support helps us bring these stories to life. Thank you for listening. In the hushed, gilded sanctuary of New York's most exclusive restaurant, where power is the main currency and money is just a whisper, a young waitress moved like a ghost among titans. She was invisible, a mere functionary in their world of billion-dollar deals and casual cruelty. But on this particular evening, two men dripping with arrogance and wealth decided to use a foreign language as their private weapon, mocking the quiet girl serving their vintage wine. They believed she was nothing. They believed they were untouchable. They were about to discover that some secrets don't stay buried and the most devastating truths can be delivered in perfect, fluent German. The air in Ethelgard's was thick with the scent of old money and new ambition. It was a carefully curated atmosphere, from the deep burgundy of the velvet banquettes to the soft golden glow of the crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen constellations. Here conversations were held in hushed tones, the clinking of crystal silverware against porcelain, the only sharp sound permitted to pierce the bubble of extreme privilege. For the patrons, it was a fortress of solitude from the chaotic city outside. For the staff, it was a gilded cage where they performed a silent nightly ballet of service, their own lives and identities checked at the door, along with the fur coats and briefcases. Anneliese Schmidt was a master of this ballet. At 26, she possessed a poise that belied her years and her station. Her movements were economical and graceful as she navigated the narrow channels between tables, her back straight, her expression a serene mask of professional neutrality. She could decant a 1982 Chateau Margaux without spilling a drop, describe the flavor profile of the pan-seared scallops with truffle foam in 3 different languages, if required, and anticipate a diner's need for a water refill before they were consciously aware of it themselves. To the clientele of Ethelgard's, she was simply the waitress, a pleasant, efficient, and utterly forgettable fixture of the scenery. No one saw the shadows behind her calm grey eyes. No one knew that the hands that so deftly cleared away their plates had once held a scholarship to Heidelberg University, one of Germany's most prestigious institutions. No one could guess that her mind, currently occupied with memorizing the evening specials, had once grappled with complex macroeconomic theories and dissected dense financial reports with an acumen that had made her professors mark her as a prodigy. That life felt like a dream, belonging to someone else. It had shattered 3 years ago, the day her father, a brilliant but trusting biochemist named Dr. Alistair Schmidt, had called her in tears. His small, innovative company, Schmidt Biosolutions, a firm built on a revolutionary water purification technology he had poured his soul into, had been gutted in a hostile takeover. The investors, a ruthless private equity firm, had used predatory tactics, exploiting legal loopholes, and manufacturing a crisis of confidence that sent his company's value plummeting. They bought it for pennies on the dollar, stripped its assets, sold off the patents, and left her father with nothing but crushing debt and a broken heart. The shock had triggered a massive stroke, leaving Alistair partially paralyzed and needing round-the-clock care. Annalise had abandoned her doctoral studies in Germany without a second thought, returning to the US to become his primary caregiver. The mountain of medical bills and the debt from the corporate sabotage had forced her into a life she never envisioned. Ethelgard's, with its high-paying clientele and generous tips, was the best she could do without a recent resume or the time for a conventional career. It was a means to an end, a penance, a way to keep her father comfortable in a decent care facility. Every night she locked her past away in a small locker in the staff room next to a worn-out copy of Keynes's The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. She put on her starched uniform, smoothed her blonde hair into a tight bun, and became the ghost of Ethelgard's. Tonight, the ghost was about to be seen. They arrived at precisely 8 o'clock, sweeping into the restaurant with an invisible wave of entitlement that parted the air before them. The man in the lead was Harrison Blackwood, a name synonymous with corporate raiding and unimaginable wealth. He was in his late 50s with a mane of silver hair, a face that looked chiseled from granite, and eyes the color of a winter sky, cold and appraising. He moved with the predatory grace of a shark, his custom-tailored suit a dark armor that screamed power. Trailing a step behind him was his associate, a younger, leaner man named Garrett Vance. Garrett had the eager, slightly anxious look of a courtier desperate to please his king. He laughed a little too loudly at Harrison's quips and scanned every room as if assessing its value and threat level simultaneously. The maître de Monsieur Dubois, a man who prided himself on his unflappable demeanor, seemed to shrink in their presence, his usual Gallic charm replaced by a fawning deference. "Mr. Blackwood, a pleasure. Your usual table is ready." "It had better be Dubois." Harrison rumbled, his voice low and resonant, not even bothering to make eye contact. They were seated in Annalise's section at the prime corner table, with a panoramic view of the city lights. It was a table reserved for the gods of this world, and tonight Harrison Blackwood was Zeus. Annalise approached with the water carafe, her face a perfect portrait of polite subservience. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I offer you still or sparkling water?" Harrison waved a dismissive hand, already deep in conversation with Garrett. Garrett was the one who answered, "Sparkling, 2 bottles of the San Pellegrino." Annalise inclined her head and retreated. As she poured the water, she couldn't help but overhear their conversation, conducted in English for now. It was about a recent acquisition, a tech startup they had streamlined to, which Annalise knew was corporate speak for firing half its workforce. The board was sentimental. Harrison was saying, a smirk playing on his lips. They talked about innovation and company culture. I told them culture doesn't show up on a balance sheet. We sold their server division to a competitor for a 50% profit in 3 weeks. End of story. Garrett chuckled. A masterclass, Harrison. Truly. Annalise placed the menus before them. "My name is Annalise, and I will be your server this evening. Our specials include a wild mushroom risotto with white truffle and a Dover sole meuniere prepared tableside." Harrison Blackwood finally looked at her. His gaze wasn't one of acknowledgement, but of appraisal, the way one might inspect a piece of furniture. His eyes swept over her from head to toe, lingering for a fraction of a second too long, a flicker of something cold and dismissive in their depths. He said nothing to her, instead turning to Garrett, and then the language changed. "Sie Sie dir an," Harrison began in crisp, clear German, his tone shifting to one of casual conspiracy. "Look at her. Annalise's hands didn't tremble as she placed the breadbasket on the table. Her posture remained ramrod straight. Inside her, however, a switch flipped. A deep primal instinct for stillness took over the kind a forest creature adopts when it senses a predator nearby. Garrett, clearly fluent himself, leaned in with a conspiratorial grin. Eine hübsche kleine Kellnerin. Bestimmt nicht die hellste Kerze auf der Torte. A pretty little waitress, certainly not the sharpest tool in the shed. Annalise straightened up her face, still a placid mask. Can I interest you gentlemen in a cocktail or a selection from our wine list before your meal? She asked in perfect English, her voice calm and even. Harrison ignored her question, taking a sip of his water. He looked out the window, then back at Garrett, continuing in German, as if she weren't there. Das ist das, was ich an Orten wie diesem liebe. Der Service ist anonym. Man kann über alles reden. Sie sind nur Teil der Einrichtung. This is what I love about places like this. The service is anonymous. You can talk about anything. They are just part of the furniture. Annalise felt a slow burn begin in her chest. It was an old familiar feeling, the sting of being underestimated, of being rendered invisible. But this was different. It was cruder, more personal. She was not just a server. She was an object of their private amusement. She stood by the table waiting, a silent statue of service. She had to. Her father's care depended on this job, on the tips from men exactly like this. She could endure it. She had endured worse. But the night was young, and Harrison Blackwood was just getting started. He had no idea that the furniture he was speaking about was not only listening, but understanding every single venomous word. And he had no idea he was about to bring up the one topic in the world that could make her break her silence. The ordering process was a display of casual dominance. Harrison Blackwood didn't consult the menu so much as command it. We'll start with the oysters Rockefeller and the steak tartare, then 2 bone-in ribeyes medium rare, and bring the 05 Petrus. Don't bother me with the tasting, just decant it properly. He waved his hand, dismissing her again. The Petrus alone was a $5,000 bottle of wine. For them it was an afterthought. Annalise retrieved the bottle from the cellar, her hands moving with practiced precision. The weight of the bottle felt obscene in her grip. It represented nearly 2 months of her father's care facility fees. As she presented the bottle to Harrison for inspection, he glanced at the label and nodded curtly, before turning back to Garrett, resuming their conversation in German. Also zurück zu North Star. Garrett said, his voice lowered slightly, but still perfectly audible to Annalise, as she began the careful ritual of decanting the wine. So back to North Star. Annalise's blood ran cold. North Star. It was the internal project name, the code name the equity firm had used for their acquisition of her father's company. She had seen it on the few documents her father's lawyer had managed to salvage from the wreckage, a name that was seared into her memory, a brand of pure poison. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat beneath her calm exterior. She kept her eyes down, focused on the steady stream of ruby-red wine pouring into the crystal decanter, her breathing measured. She couldn't react. She wouldn't. North Star was a thing of beauty. Harrison mused, a cruel nostalgia in his voice. He swirled the wine Garrett had poured for him, inhaling its aroma. Der alte Narr Schmidt, hat uns alles geglaubt. The old fool Schmidt, he believed everything we told him. Annalise flinched. The insult was so direct, so personal, it was like a physical blow. Old fool. He was talking about her father, her brilliant, gentle, trusting father, the man who read poetry to her at night and taught her how to identify constellations, the man whose life's work was now being mocked over a $5,000 bottle of wine by the very monster who had destroyed him. Garrett laughed, a sycophantic, ugly sound. Sprach immer von ethischen Verpflichtungen und dem Wohl der Menschheit, als ob das Rechnungen bezahlen würde. He was always talking about ethical obligations and the good of humanity, as if that pays the bills. Exactly, Harrison affirmed, leaning back in his chair. We created the narrative. A few whispers to the right journalists about cash flow problems, a fabricated internal report leaked to his key investors suggesting the purification tech was unstable. Classic fear-mongering. By the time we made our offer, they were so panicked they practically paid us to take the company off their hands. The restaurant, the clinking of plates, the soft murmur of other conversations. It all faded away. Annalise was trapped in a horrifying bubble with these two men forced to listen to a live recounting of her family's ruin. She could picture it all, her father pacing his office, his face etched with worry as the calls came in, his trust in his partners, eroding his dream, turning into a nightmare. These men hadn't just bought a company, they had orchestrated a man's collapse. The best part, Garrett added, his eyes gleaming with admiration, was using his own head of R&D against him. What was his name? Peterson. Peterson, Harrison confirmed with a smirk. We promised him a seat on the board of the new shell company. All he had to do was fudge the data on the long-term viability tests. The idiot signed an affidavit saying the tech had a critical flaw that would emerge after 5 years. It was a complete lie, of course, but it was the nail in the coffin. Schmidt's credibility was shot. Annalise remembered Dr. Peterson, a man her father had mentored for a decade, treated like a son. The betrayal had hurt him more than the financial loss. She finished decanting the wine, her movements robotic. She poured a small amount into Harrison's glass, and then Garrett's, her face, an unreadable mask of professional stone. But inside, a glacial rage was forming, solidifying the grief and helplessness she had felt for 3 long years into something hard and sharp. They had moved on from appetizers and were now waiting for their steaks, the wine flowing freely. Harrison was becoming more expansive, more arrogant with every sip. He gestured toward Annalise with his glass as she refilled his water. Schau sie dir an, wie sie herumschwebt. He slurred slightly. Look at her, how she hovers. Keine Ahnung, was für Gespräche direkt vor ihrer Nase stattfinden. Das Gehirn einer Goldfischs in einem hübschen Paket. Wahrscheinlich ist ihre größte Sorge im Leben, ob sie genug Trinkgeld für ihre Miete bekommt. No idea what kind of conversations are happening right under her nose. The brain of a goldfish in a pretty package. Her biggest worry in life is probably whether she'll make enough tip money for her rent. Garrett snickered into his napkin. Weniger Sorgen, mehr Glück, nehme ich an. Less worry, more happiness, I suppose. That was it. The condescension, the cruelty, the utter dehumanization. It wasn't just about her father anymore. It was about her and every person like her who worked tirelessly to be invisible for the comfort of men like Harrison Blackwood. The patronizing assumption that her life was small, her mind empty, her worries trivial. All the suppressed pain, the abandoned dreams, the quiet fury of the last 3 years coalesced into a single point of incandescent clarity. She had nothing left to lose. Her father was gone. The stroke had taken his life 6 months ago, a fact that made their current mockery feel like a desecration of his memory. This job was just a cage, and Harrison Blackwood had just handed her the key. The steaks arrived, carried by another server, but Annalise stepped forward to place them on the table. She set Harrison's plate down first, then Garrett's. Her hands were perfectly steady. She didn't retreat. She stood straight, her chin up, and looked Harrison Blackwood directly in the eye. For the first time all evening, he was forced to truly see her not as a function, but as a person. He frowned, annoyed by her presence. "Is there a problem?" he asked in English, his tone sharp with irritation. Anneliese took a slow, deep breath, letting it out gently. She felt a strange, terrifying calm settle over her. It was the calm of a captain about to scuttle his own ship to take down the enemy flagship with it. She met his cold gaze and held it. Then, in flawless academic German, tinged with the faint, educated accent of the Heidelberg region, her voice low, but carrying the cold, clear authority of a judge, she spoke. "Es gibt in der Tat ein Problem, Herr Blackwood." There is indeed a problem, Mr. Blackwood. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Harrison Blackwood froze mid-motion, his fork hovering over his perfectly cooked steak. The smug, wine-flushed confidence drained from his face, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. His jaw went slack. His cold blue eyes, which had held nothing but dismissive arrogance all evening, now widened in stunned disbelief. He looked as if the marble statue in the corner had just leaned over and asked him for the time. Garrett Vance choked on his wine. He sputtered, coughing into his napkin, his face turning a blotchy red. He stared at Anneliese, then at Harrison, then back at Anneliese, his mind visibly failing to compute what was happening. The silence at their table was suddenly a vacuum, pulling in the ambient sounds of the restaurant. Anneliese didn't waver. She held Harrison's gaze, her own eyes, like chips of grey flint. She had his full, undivided attention. For the first time, he was seeing her, really seeing her. And he was terrified. She continued in the same calm, lethal German. Zuerst möchte ich einen kleinen grammatikalischen Punkt korrigieren. Man sagt nicht das Gehirn einer Goldfischs. Der Genitiv von Goldfisch ist des Goldfisches. Wenn Sie schon jemanden in einer Sprache beleidigen wollen, die Sie für überlegen halten, sollten Sie zumindest die Grundlagen beherrschen. First, I'd like to correct a small point of grammar. One doesn't say the brain of a goldfish is. The genitive of goldfish is des Goldfishes. If you're going to insult someone in a language you believe makes you superior, you should at least master the basics. It was a surgeon's cut, precise, devastating, and utterly unexpected. She hadn't just revealed that she understood. She had asserted her intellectual superiority in the very language he had used as a shield. Garrett looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Harrison, however, was recovering from the initial shock, his expression hardening into a mask of fury. The blood was returning to his face, suffusing it with a dangerous mottled purple. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he snarled, switching back to English, his voice a low growl. Anneliese did not switch back. She stayed in German, forcing him to meet her on her chosen ground. "Wer ich bin?" she asked, a sad, ironic smile touching her lips for a fleeting moment. "Ich bin diejenige, deren größte Sorge weit über das Trinkgeld für die Miete hinausgeht, obwohl das dank Ihnen tatsächlich eine Sorge ist. Ich bin diejenige, deren Goldfischgehirn Magna cum laude in Wirtschaftswissenschaften an der Universität Heidelberg abgeschlossen hat. Who am I? I am the one whose biggest worry extends far beyond tip money for rent, though thanks to you, that is indeed a concern. I am the one whose goldfish brain graduated magna cum laude in economics from Heidelberg University. She took a small step closer, her voice dropping even lower, making it more intense, more personal. Aber das ist nicht der Grund, warum Sie sich erinnern sollten. Sie sollten sich an einen anderen Namen erinnern. Einen Namen, den Sie als den alten Narren bezeichnet haben. But that's not the name you should remember. You should remember another name. A name you referred to as the old fool. She let the words hang in the air for a beat, watching the dawning horror, and then finally recognition in Harrison's eyes. He knew. He was connecting the dots. Her accent, her fluency, her presence here. "My name ist Annelies Schmidt," she said, her voice vibrating with 3 years of suppressed grief and rage. "Dr. Alistair Schmidt war mein Vater." If her first words had been a slap, these were a battering ram. Harrison Blackwood physically recoiled in his seat. The name spoken aloud confirmed his worst fear. This wasn't a random coincidence. This was a reckoning. The hushed elegance of Ethelgard's had evaporated. Diners at nearby tables had fallen silent. Their forks paused. Their heads turned. They might not have understood the German, but they understood the universal language of confrontation. They saw the powerful billionaire shrinking in his seat, and the quiet waitress standing over him like an avenging angel. Annelies wasn't finished. The dam had broken, and the words poured out not in a torrent of anger, but in a controlled, chillingly precise indictment. "Sie haben über North Star gesprochen," she continued in German, her eyes locked on his. "Ich habe jedes Wort gehört. Wie Sie die Lügen über die Instabilität der Technologie verbreitet haben. Wie Sie Dr. Peterson, den Mann, den mein Vater wie einen Sohn behandelt hat, dazu gebracht haben, seine Forschung zu verraten. Wie Sie sich damit gebrüstet haben, ihn mit einem wertlosen Vorstandssitz in einer Scheinfirma bestochen zu haben. Sie haben nicht nur sein Unternehmen gestohlen, Herr Blackwood, Sie haben seinen Geist gebrochen. You spoke of North Star. I heard every word. How you spread the lies about the technology's instability. How you got Dr. Peterson, the man my father treated like a son, to betray his research. How you bragged about bribing him with a worthless board seat in a shell company. You didn't just steal his company, Mr. Blackwood. You broke his spirit. Her voice trembled for the first time, but she mastered it instantly. Der Schlaganfall, den erlitt, eine Woche, nachdem sie die letzte Unterschrift erzwungen hatten, war kein Zufall. Ihr feindliches Übernahmeverfahren war ein Todesurteil. Sie saßen hier und tranken seinen Gegenwert in Wein, während sie über die Zerstörung seines Lebens lachten. Er ist vor 6 Monaten gestorben. Ich hoffe, der Wein hat Ihnen geschmeckt. The stroke he suffered 1 week after you forced the final signature was not a coincidence. Your hostile takeover was a death sentence. You sat here drinking its equivalent value in wine while you laughed about destroying his life. He died 6 months ago. I hope you enjoyed the wine. The final sentence, delivered with icy finality, hung in the air like a shard of glass. Harrison was speechless. He was completely exposed, his vile conversation laid bare. He looked around wildly, seeing the curious and judgmental eyes of his peers upon him. The carefully constructed facade of the untouchable Titan had been shattered by a waitress in a hushed restaurant. Garrett, pale as a sheet, finally found his voice, stammering in English. "Now see here. There's no need for this. This is a private conversation." Annelies turned her cold gaze on him. "Es war keine private Unterhaltung," she shot back in German. "Es war eine öffentliche Zurschaustellung von Arroganz. Und jetzt ist es eine öffentliche Zurschaustellung der Wahrheit. It wasn't a private conversation. It was a public display of arrogance. And now it's a public display of truth." She straightened up her duty, done the rage inside her, replaced by a vast, aching emptiness. She reverted to English, her voice crisp and professional, the mask of the server clicking back into place one last time. It was the most powerful move she could make. "Will there be anything else? Gentlemen." Harrison Blackwood finally surged to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. His face was a thunderous mask of fury and humiliation. "You're fired," he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You'll never work in this city again." Before Annalise could respond, Monsieur Dubois materialized at her side. He had heard the commotion and seen the entire exchange. He looked at the trembling, furious billionaire, then at the impossibly composed waitress, and at the dozen pairs of eyes from the city's elite watching him. He made a calculation. "Mr. Blackwood," Dubois said, his voice firm, his French accent thick with authority. "Mademoiselle Schmidt is my employee, not yours. And in my establishment, we do not tolerate the abuse of our staff. Perhaps it is you who should leave." The collective gasp from the surrounding tables was audible. Dubois had just chosen a waitress over one of his wealthiest patrons. Annalise took a small black leather billfold from her apron pocket. With a steady hand, she placed it on the table next to Harrison's uneaten steak. "Your check, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice even, "including the Petrus." It was the ultimate act of defiance. She wasn't just exposing him, she was serving him the bill for it. Harrison stared at the bill, then at Annalise, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Defeated, humiliated, and utterly silenced, he threw some cash onto the table, grabbed his coat, and stormed out of the restaurant, Garrett scurrying behind him like a chastened dog. The moment they were gone, a strange thing happened. A ripple of soft, spontaneous applause broke out from the surrounding tables. It wasn't loud or boisterous, but it was unmistakable. It was a murmur of support, of respect, a quiet acknowledgement of courage in a place where it was so rarely seen. Annalise simply nodded, a silent thank you to the anonymous faces. Then she turned and walked, not ran toward the sanctuary of the staff exit, the gilded cage's door finally open. The moment the swinging kitchen doors closed behind her, Annalise's composure crumbled. She leaned against the cool stainless steel wall, her legs suddenly feeling like water. Her breath came in ragged, shuddering gasps. The adrenaline that had fueled her righteous fury drained away, leaving behind the profound, bone-deep exhaustion of a soldier after a long and brutal war. The victory felt hollow, overshadowed by the fresh wave of grief that washed over her. She had spoken the truth. She had avenged her father's memory in some small way, but it wouldn't bring him back. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed for months streamed silently down her cheeks, not of sadness, but of pure cathartic release. Her colleagues, the other waiters and kitchen staff who had witnessed the tail end of the confrontation through the porthole window of the door, kept a respectful distance. They saw her tears not as weakness, but as the aftermath of a monumental display of strength. The head chef, a burly man named Antoine, quietly placed a glass of water on a nearby prep counter for her. It was a small gesture of solidarity in their shared world of service. A few minutes later, Monsieur Dubois entered the kitchen. His face, usually a mask of professional stress, was uncharacteristically gentle. He approached Annalise cautiously. "Mademoiselle Schmidt," he began softly. "Annalise, are you all right?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and straightened up, trying to regain a semblance of professionalism. "I apologize, Monsieur Dubois. I lost my composure. I understand if you have to let me go. I will clear out my locker." Dubois held up a hand. "Let you go, Annalise, what you did. It took a courage I have not seen in a very long time. That man Blackwood, he is a bully who believes his money makes him a king. Tonight you showed him he is just a man, a cruel one at that." He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I will not lie to you. He will likely try to cause problems for this restaurant. He is powerful. But Ethel Guards has a reputation that predates Harrison Blackwood, and it will endure long after he is forgotten." My reputation, however, would not survive if I fired an employee for defending her dignity and her family's honor. He paused, his expression serious. You have a home here for as long as you want it. Take the rest of the night off. Go home and rest. Annalise was stunned. In a world where the customer was always right, especially a customer who could buy and sell the entire block, her manager had chosen to stand by her. Thank you, monsieur, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. It means more than you know. As she gathered her things from her locker, her worn-out purse, her coat, and the old economics textbook, she felt a profound shift in her own perception. She had walked into work that evening as a ghost resigned to her fate. She was walking out as Annalise Schmidt, daughter of Alistair Schmidt, a woman who had spoken truth to power and had not been struck down. The story, however, didn't end when she walked out the door. Unbeknownst to anyone at the time, one of the patrons who had witnessed the entire drama was Evelyn Reed, a senior investigative journalist for the New York Chronicle. She had been dining with an off-the-record source, but the scene at Blackwood's table had quickly become the only story in the room. Evelyn, who had a nose for hypocrisy and a deep-seated dislike for corporate predators, had recorded the last part of the exchange on her phone, capturing Blackwood's furious exit and the subsequent applause. She didn't understand the German, but she understood the power dynamics. She spent the next hour discreetly interviewing 2 other diners and a busboy piecing together the narrative. She had the names Harrison Blackwood and Annalise Schmidt. By the time Annalise was on the subway home, her story was already taking on a life of its own. The next morning, it broke. Evelyn Reed's article was published on the front page of the Chronicle's digital edition under a blaring headline, "The Billionaire and the Waitress of Ethelgard's How a Secret Conversation in German exposed the rotten heart of a corporate raider." The article was a masterpiece of narrative journalism. It detailed the scene at the restaurant with cinematic flair, contrasted Blackwood's immense wealth with Annalise's quiet dignity, and most importantly, Evelyn had done her homework overnight. She had cross-referenced North Star and Schmidt and uncovered the basic details of the hostile takeover of Schmidt Biosolutions. She painted a devastating picture of a brilliant scientist being ruined by a heartless predator. The story of Annalise the prodigy, forced to become a waitress to care for her dying father, was the emotional core that made the story explode. By 9:00 a.m., Ethelgard's Waitress was trending on social media. The story was everywhere. It was the perfect David and Goliath tale for the digital age. People shared it with furious comments about corporate greed and heartfelt praise for Annalise's bravery. Someone dug up her academic records from Heidelberg, confirming her story. A picture of her father, Dr. Alistair Schmidt, accepting an award for innovation, began to circulate. The fallout for Harrison Blackwood was immediate and catastrophic. The stock price of his flagship firm, Blackwood Capital, began to nosedive as soon as the market opened. His board of directors, the same people who had applauded his ruthless tactics in private, were now terrified of the public relations nightmare. The story wasn't just about him being a jerk in a restaurant. It was about the fraudulent methods he'd used in the North Star acquisition. The mention of a bribed researcher and a fabricated report about the tech's viability caught the attention of more than just the public. It caught the attention of the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Garrett Vance was the first casualty. He was fired before lunch, a sacrificial lamb offered up in a desperate attempt to contain the damage. Blackwood issued a half-hearted, lawyer-vetted apology for his inappropriate language, which the public immediately tore apart as insincere. For Annalise, the day was a surreal whirlwind. Her phone, a cheap prepaid device, buzzed incessantly with calls and texts from numbers she didn't recognize. Reporters camped outside her small apartment building. She stayed inside watching the story unfold on her laptop, feeling detached, as if she were reading about someone else. Then, late in the afternoon, an email arrived that cut through the noise. The sender was Robert Chen, the CEO of Phoenix Holdings, a rival investment firm known for its focus on sustainable and ethical ventures. Chen had been a long-time admirer of her father's work and had even tried to partner with Schmidt Biosolutions years ago, before Blackwood had swept in. The email was brief and to the point. Subject your father's legacy. Dear Ms. Schmidt, I have just read the story in the Chronicle. I knew your father, and I know what the world lost when his work was dismantled. What you did last night took incredible courage. But what interests me more is the intellect that was so clear in your takedown of Mr. Blackwood. My firm Phoenix Holdings is launching a new division focused on identifying and funding socially responsible technological innovation, exactly the kind of work your father championed. We need someone to lead it. Someone with a background in economics, an understanding of technology, and an unimpeachable moral compass. This is not a gesture of pity. This is a job offer. I believe you are the most qualified person for this role. If you are interested, my door is always open. Sincerely, Robert Chen. Annalise read the email 3 times. Her hands trembled, but this time it wasn't from fear or shock. It was from hope, a fragile, unfamiliar tendril of hope rising from the ashes of her past. This wasn't just a job. It was a chance to reclaim her own future and to continue her father's legacy in a way she never thought possible. The echo of her words at Ethelgard's hadn't just torn down a bully. It had built her a bridge to a new life. 1 week after the incident at Ethelgard's, the world had irrevocably shifted for both Annalise Schmidt and Harrison Blackwood. For Blackwood, the descent was swift and brutal. The SEC launched a formal investigation into the North Star acquisition, citing Evelyn Reed's article. Dr. Peterson, the researcher Blackwood had bribed, saw the writing on the wall. Faced with potential federal charges, he agreed to cooperate fully with investigators, providing evidence of the fabricated reports and the terms of his illicit deal with Blackwood Capital. The scandal was no longer a matter of public opinion. It was a matter of criminal inquiry. Blackwood was forced to step down as CEO, his name, now a toxic asset. The empire he had built on fear and intimidation was crumbling under the weight of a single truth-filled conversation. For Annalise, the ascent was just as rapid, but far more profound. After a weekend of careful consideration, she had accepted Robert Chen's offer. She walked into the gleaming downtown offices of Phoenix Holdings, not as a waitress, but as the newly appointed director of the Ethical Innovation Initiative. The contrast with her previous life was stark. Instead of a cramped staff locker, she had a spacious corner office with a view that rivaled the one from Ethelgard's. Instead of a starched uniform, she wore a simple but elegant business suit that felt like both an armor and a liberation. Her colleagues didn't look through her. They looked to her for guidance and expertise. Her first meeting was with Robert Chen himself. He was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake, the antithesis of Harrison Blackwood. "Annalise," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I want to be clear about why you're here. The world is full of intelligent people. It is full of economists and financial analysts. What is rare is wisdom. The wisdom to know that how you make money is just as important as how much you make. Your father had that wisdom, and from everything I've seen, so do you." He slid a file across the polished table. "This is our first project for the new division. It's a portfolio of startups working on everything from sustainable agriculture to affordable medical diagnostics. I want you to vet them, Find the ones that have the potential to change the world for the better. Find the next Schmidt Biosolutions, and this time let's make sure we protect it. As Annalise opened the file, she saw a list of names and ideas, brimming with hope and ingenuity. It felt like coming home. The part of her brain that had been dormant for 3 years, the part that loved data and complex systems, sparked back to life. But now it was tempered with the hard-won wisdom of her experience. She would look not just at the balance sheets, but at the people behind them. She would listen not just to what they said, but to how they said it. Her first major act as director was a personal one. Using her newfound resources and connections, she initiated legal proceedings to reacquire the patents for her father's water purification technology. Blackwood Capital, now in disarray and desperate to shed its toxic assets, settled almost immediately, selling them back for a fraction of their true worth. Annalise established a foundation in her father's name, placing the patents in a public trust to be licensed at low cost to developing nations. Her father's life's work would finally serve the good of humanity, just as he had always intended. One evening, about a month into her new role, Annalise found herself working late. As she packed her briefcase, she looked out her office window at the sprawling tapestry of city lights. Far below, nestled amongst the skyscrapers, she could just make out the warm glow of Ethelgard's. She thought of the girl she had been, the ghost in the gilded cage, moving silently with her grief. She had thought that strength meant enduring the pain, hiding it away. She realized now that true strength was speaking it aloud, no matter the cost. She had not set out for revenge. Revenge was a fire that consumed everything. What she had achieved was something more lasting: justice. And from the ashes of that confrontation, something new and beautiful was rising. Her father's legacy was secure. Her own future, once a bleak landscape of obligation, was now a horizon of limitless possibility. She turned off the light in her office, leaving the city to its nightly glitter. She was no longer a waitress serving the powerful. She was one of them now, but on her own terms, guided by a different set of values. Annalise Schmidt was finally free, not just from her past, but to build a better future. The ghost of Ethelgard's had found her voice, and it was a voice that would now help shape the world. 6 months passed. The chill of autumn gave way to the deep freeze of winter, and with the changing of the seasons, the landscape of Annalise's life transformed completely. She was no longer defined by the trauma of her past, but by the promise of the future she was actively building. At Phoenix Holdings, she wasn't just an employee. She was a force. She moved with a quiet, earned confidence, her intelligence no longer a hidden weapon, but a tool she used daily to construct, to nurture, and to empower. Her first major success was the funding of Viridian Dynamics, a small startup founded by 2 brilliant but underfunded engineers who had developed a biodegradable polymer to replace single-use plastics. Annalise had seen past their shaky presentation and into the heart of their science, recognizing the same spark of world-changing potential her father had possessed. She championed their cause within Phoenix, structuring a deal that gave them the capital they needed without sacrificing their mission. The project was a resounding success, earning praise from environmental groups and positioning Phoenix Holdings at the forefront of the green tech revolution. Robert Chen had taken to calling her the architect, because she didn't just find innovation, she built the frameworks for it to thrive. The news about Harrison Blackwood became background noise, a distant echo of a battle long won. He was mired in legal proceedings, his fortune bleeding away in lawyers' fees and SEC fines. His name was a punchline in financial circles, a cautionary tale about hubris. Annalise felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a detached sense of an equation finally being balanced. Her focus was on building, not destroying. One crisp Tuesday afternoon, an email landed in her inbox that pierced the calm of her new reality. The sender's name was Garrett Vance. Annalise stared at the name, a phantom ache of memory surfacing. She remembered his sycophantic laughter, his pale, panicked face in the restaurant. She almost deleted the email, but a sense of unresolved curiosity stayed her hand. She opened it. The message was short-stripped of the corporate jargon he had once spouted. Ms. Schmidt? I know you have no reason to read this, let alone respond. I am not writing to ask for forgiveness, as I know I have no right to it. I am writing to ask for 5 minutes of your time. There are things I feel I must say to you in person, not as an excuse, but as an explanation. I will be at the coffee shop on the corner of your building, the Daily Grind, tomorrow at 1 p.m. If you do not come, I will understand completely and will not bother you again. Sincerely, Garrett Vance. Her first instinct was to refuse. Why dredge up the ugliest night of her life? But as she considered it, she realized this wasn't about him. It was about her. It was about closing the final chapter, about understanding the full anatomy of the system that had victimized her family. She needed to see what became of the men who weren't titans, but merely the men who propped them up. The next day she walked into the Daily Grind. Garrett was sitting at a small table in the back, and he was nearly unrecognizable. The sharp suit was gone, replaced by a frayed sweater. His face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed with a weariness that went beyond simple fatigue. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. He flinched when he saw her, then stood up, awkwardly. Ms. Schmidt. Annalise. Thank you for coming. I have 5 minutes, Mr. Vance, she said, her tone neutral as she remained standing. He nodded, motioning to the empty chair. Please. She sat her posture straight, her hands folded on the table. I don't know where to start, he began, his voice raspy. I lost everything after that night. My job, my reputation. My fiancée left me. I deserved all of it. For months I was just angry. At Blackwood, at the journalist, even at you. But that was the coward's way out. He looked down at his hands. The truth is, I knew what Blackwood was. I knew the North Star deal was rotten. I saw how he operated, how he enjoyed the cruelty, and I went along with it. I admired it. I wanted to be him. I told myself it was just business, that people like your father were just unfortunate but necessary collateral damage on the path to success. He finally looked up, and Annalise saw tears welling in his eyes. What I want to say is, I'm sorry. I am sorry for my part in what happened to your father. I'm sorry for what I said, what I thought, and what I failed to do. I was a ghoul feeding on the scraps of a monster's table. And I needed to say that to you face to face. Annalise listened, her expression unreadable. She had expected excuses, pleas, a desperate attempt at manipulation. She had not expected this raw, pathetic confession. She saw in him not a villain, but a profound and tragic failure of character. Why tell me this now? She asked quietly. Because I have to start over, he said. And I can't build anything new on a foundation of lies. I'm working a stocking job in a warehouse in Queens. It's honest work. It's quiet. It gives me a lot of time to think. And I realized that the only person I was truly fooling back then was myself. Annalise was silent for a long moment. She could destroy him with a few cold words. She could walk away and leave him in his self-pity. But that was Blackwood's way. That wasn't hers. Redemption isn't about getting forgiveness from those you've wronged, Mr. Vance. She said, her voice softer now, but no less firm. It's a debt you pay to yourself. You don't fix the past by apologizing for it. You atone for it by what you do next. Find a way to do some good. It doesn't have to be grand. Just be a better man than you were. That's the only apology that will ever matter. She stood up. I wish you peace, Mr. Vance. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving him with her final, unexpected gift, a roadmap not to her forgiveness, but to his own salvation. That evening, Annalise made a reservation. She walked into Ethelgard's not through the staff entrance, but through the grand front doors. She was greeted not with the expectation of service, but with the reverence afforded to a legend. Monsieur Dubois himself came forward, his face breaking into a wide, genuine smile. Annalise, it is an honor to have you back. The honor is mine, Jean-Pierre, she said, using his first name for the first time. A table for one, please. He didn't hesitate. He led her personally across the plush carpet, past the curious eyes of the new wave of patrons, and seated her at the prime corner table. Her table. As she sat there looking out at the same city lights, she felt the last vestiges of the ghost she once was fade away. She was the architect of her own world now. She ordered a simple, elegant meal and a glass of Sancerre. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, not as a former waitress in awe, but as a woman who knew her own worth. Her meal was a silent celebration of her journey. It was an homage to her father, a reclamation of a space that had once been the site of her deepest humiliation, and a toast to the boundless future. When the check came, she paid it, leaving a generous tip for the young waitress, who served her, a girl with bright, hopeful eyes, who reminded Annalise just a little of herself. This story is a powerful reminder that there is often more to people than meets the eye. Behind a uniform or a job title, there can be a wealth of experience, intelligence, and untold stories. Annalise's journey shows us that dignity isn't something that can be taken away by contempt or arrogance. It's something we claim for ourselves. Her courage to speak her truth in the face of overwhelming power didn't just expose a cruel man. It unlocked her own potential and reclaimed her father's legacy. It's a testament to the idea that one voice speaking with conviction can indeed change the world, or at least their small corner of it. If this story of resilience, justice,